Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, outbound prospecting is proving difficult for a lot of people. It's always been tough, but it's tougher now. And the reason most buyers are reluctant is that they're thinking, is this a bot? Is this a person? It's very hard to tell. But when you look at picking up the phone, right away you debunk the theory because there's a human on the other end. And I had the pleasure of speaking with Beall, who is the CEO of Connect and Sell. He's also a host of Market Dominance Guys podcast. And he broke apart, many areas and facets of cold calling. And one of them is just the mindset we need to adopt in that we're ambushing somebody. We are coming into their day unannounced. And so the first problem is us. We have to acknowledge that we are a problem for them. And a lot of that is, letting them know that this is an unexpected call, that we are an interruption for their day. And so that that disarms them immediately. And then that next step is, they're more open to hearing what we have to say to start building trust, because he says we have 7 seconds to build trust. So we talked a lot about the mindset. We talked about some tactics we can do, how really it is the perfect environment for marketing and sales in a cold call, where marketing is, driven, come up with the list. And then we are going to execute that list on the call. And, even if the call doesn't give us the meeting we're looking for, we still have gotten information. So we come on the call with a hypothesis. We've captured information based on the persona, the segment, the industry, that allows us to put it back into our script, redefine it and hone it, so that when we're executing, our prospects feel like, well, you really get us. And a lot of that is just having these conversations. So if we're not having the conversations, we're in our head, we're speculating, we're guessing, we're assuming. And so how can you have a system that removes all the friction, all the, I have to, find these numbers. This is the wrong number. It does it for you. And it's almost like, be careful what you wish for, because when you get a ping in your ear and it's go time and you have someone on the other end, you panic. And that's where they teach the flight school of really, what should you be saying in those 7 seconds? After that, what do you say? And the script is important, but it's also the tonality, the emotion, and really showing up as a human. So definitely, he's opened my eyes. I had a great conversation. As always, I'm learning. So invite you to listen to it. If you're a sales leader, share it with your team. Perhaps this is a product you'd like to use, and really start getting at those numbers, and allowing your reps to get more at bats, more time to sell and engage with prospects, have conversations, versus being in the weeds and always kind of hiding in the friction. This removes all that for you to allow you to do what you should be doing. If you haven't downloaded, it'd be great if you download the podcast, subscribe to it, and also leave us a review so we can continue to get amazing guests such as Beall on the podcast. So thanks for listening, everybody, and hope you enjoy our conversation. So I am delighted to be speaking to the CEO of Connect and Sell, Beall. Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Karen, awesome to be here.
I'm so excited to break apart. And I don't even want to say cold calling is dead, because I don't even want to say that, because if you think about anything, it just sucks me into the thought of a lot of people. But those who don't want to do anything, that's their approach, right? Of negativity and I can't do it. So if you've never done it and you're not good at it, you're probably going to continue to say that. But if we just start, Chris, can you share any trends? Because if you think about even pre-pandemic or even before then, when the phone was hot, is it gone up, down? Is it rebalanced out? Or has it kind of been consistent throughout? What's kind of the baseline as it relates to cold calling?
Yeah, it's really interesting. The pandemic didn't do much to the phone except for a little while. It made everybody forward their office phone to their cell phone. So it improved answer rates just a bit for about
Uh-huh.
6 months. Meanwhile, of course, the people who were afraid of talking on the phone said that it must have killed the phone because it gave them a reason to not have to call anybody. So it's like, oh, it must be impossible to get people. It became very difficult to get people on the phone in business back in the early 2000s when actually the driver was storage. Computer storage became very cheap. And so voicemail systems were suddenly these funny commodities that if you had one in your business, you were encouraged by your voicemail vendor to open it up to outside calls. For those of us old enough to remember voicemail, it was always for internal calls. That was its purpose. You would
Mhm.
never open it up and let vendors call you. That'd be stupid because it was way too expensive to store the voice messages. So when the storage got cheap, the vendors said, hey, really, you can make more use of this, which is pretty funny. I have people call, kind of crazy actually. And then you couple that with caller IDs becoming universal and displaying on phones. And suddenly you had a situation where instead of the phone call going to your admin, and admins, of course, started to decrease in population, you just had to catch people. So it just became a more statistical game in the early 2000s. And at this point, it's about a 22 to 1 shot. That is 1 in 22 times you'll catch somebody if you dial them. That hasn't changed too much. It was like 17 to 1, 5, 6 years ago. It goes up a little bit, but it's not really the driving factor, other than it's so time consuming and frustrating to do it by hand that, you're smart if you can figure out another way to do it that isn't by hand.
Mhm. I mean, when you think of 20, well, that's not much of a variance, 17 to 1 to 22 to 1. But like you said, it is time consuming. And I think when people are looking at cold calling, they've got their list and they should have, they've segmented it so that they're talking to the same persona and they're just kind of in that zone. But then there's sometimes this excuse that, oh, I got to follow up in between and I got to go into Zoom info. And it's like, if you streamline, the prep, it's like painting, tape your lines, get everything prepared and then actually paint. And so the cold call. So what I feel and what I see is when I train reps sometimes is that they almost hide or there's comfort and safety in the weeds because it's like, well, I got to go do this. I got to go do this. So out of that hour, cold calling block, I was only able to make 10 calls. And it's like, well, if you actually had an efficient system and sequencing to it, you might get better. So what are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing that with perhaps if you look at your case studies before partners and after partners, is there a bit of hiding in the mess
Yeah, well,
or
for
is it
one
am I
thing,
totally off?
yeah, for one thing, nobody has good data. So there's nothing to compare before and after to. If they're
Okay.
calling, they're probably dialing the phone 10 times. They're talking to one person every hour to 2 hours. And it's so close to zero that it's sort of hard to detect. It's like trying to
Mhm.
figure out, hey, I brought you a car. We're going to use it to commute. Did you used to commute on foot? And the answer is, well, I said I did, but I just stayed at home and, got
Mhm.
on Zoom. So it's really, really hard to do before and after studies with what we do anyway. I mean, what we do, just in case anybody's curious, is we let somebody push a button and talk to somebody in their list in about 3 minutes with no effort. So when you talk to somebody with no effort, that is no effort to get them on the phone, suddenly you realize you've got to be good. And
Mm.
that I think is what is the big challenge. I think most folks know they aren't great at an ambush call. They know it's a peculiar, to use my mother's favorite word, kind of conversation. It doesn't fit the mold of the other conversations. And they know that they're going to cast themselves as a bad person by ambushing somebody. And no one wants to be a bad person. So it's awkward in several ways, and it's conveniently so inconvenient that folks just tend not to do it. So as soon as it's easy to do, a whole raft of new challenges show up, which is fascinating. So yeah, it's a funny world, right? When folks say cold calling is dead, what they mean is it's gotten time consuming, and I'm not sure I'm very good at it. And anyway, it makes me feel like I'm doing a bad thing to somebody, and I'd rather hang out and email. But
Mhm.
the mega trend going on right now is ChatGPT. So I just went to
Mhm.
Microsoft's Build conference in Seattle the other day, last week, where all the programmers get together. So I'm an old programmer myself, so I go in and fake it, right? And it was all about ChatGPT. What nobody said was ChatGPT and all the other generative stuff just took the last bit of trust out of text-based communication.
Mhm.
Because is it that person or is it their bot?
Mhm.
Well, you're pretty sure you're not going to trust the vendor's bot, right? Is the vendor's bot on your side? I don't think no one's going to buy
Yeah.
that one. So now we've just had essentially the destruction of cold email as an outbound technique, and it happened over about a 3-week period. Folks aren't aware of it yet. It's like a tsunami that's coming from out in the ocean. The wave's only a foot high right now. But trust me,
Mhm.
when it comes to shore, it is going to inundate email based cold outreach.
Mhm. But it's just the level of mediocrity, and because it's a bot driven email. And so even we were saying, multi-channel approach, but also video where they can see you, and to your point, phone, like they know they can hear the tonality, the pausing, that there's a live human on the phone. And I think when you're looking at breaking through the noise and just actually having a human, it's a great tool to leverage. But what you just said there, I just want to pause for a moment, Chris. You said when they're kind of their identity is they've already claimed that they're a bad person by doing this and that they're interrupting someone else's day. Like I think when you already adopt that mindset, anything downstream is failure and negativity. And so it's like, how important is it for these reps to really embody and believe and lead with, I am an interruption, but I know I can help them, and coming at it through that lens so that their outcome is going to be different.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the most subtle part of the whole thing. So there's the fact, and the fact is when you ambush somebody on the phone, you are a problem. That's just a fact of the world. For any one of us, when we answer the phone and it's not who we expect, and it's some salesperson who's trying to tell us how to do our job, it's not great. That's
Mhm.
not what we're looking for. So we suddenly have a new goal in life, which is to get off this call with our self-image intact. Now, if all we wanted to do is get off the call, we'd just hang up. Thank goodness we want to keep our self-image intact when somebody ambushes us. So that's where, in that little subtle dynamic, is where the opening is for us to go from knowing that we're doing a bad thing, but we're not a bad person. But we will be identified
Mhm.
instantly by the other person as a bad thing and maybe a bad person unless we kind of take care of that business right up front. So when we ambush somebody, it's good to know what we are objectively. I mean, it's like I have a very good friend who cold calls using our product, and his name's Scott Webb. So he's chief sales officer over at Hub International, huge, huge insurance brokerage. He called me one day and said, "Okay, I'm going into a session with my folks." So he leads from the front. He leads blitzes with his people, and they do amazing things. And he said, "I'm going to change my mindset. My mindset's bad." And I said, "Really?" Because you're like the only 35% conversation to meeting conversion guy that I know, other than Cheryl Turner, who taught him how to do this. And he said, "No, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put in my mind that I'm reaching out, slamming my fist into the middle of somebody's chest to keep them from walking in front of a speeding bus. I know I'm going to hurt them,
Mhm.
but I know I'm going to save them." And he adopted that mindset
Yes.
and called me back in an hour and said, "I just went 5 for 5." So
Mhm.
it's naturally paradoxical. It's like being a surgeon. I mean, does anybody really just walk up to somebody on the street? Say you're an expert at diagnosing, I don't know, heart disease, just looking at somebody. So you walk up to somebody in the street and you know that they have a serious heart disease, and you can save them with your saws and your knives and your stitches and everything. What if you didn't have the opportunity to put them on the operating table? You just had to walk up to them and slam them to the ground and cut their chest open, blood's everywhere, but you're saving their life. You'd have to work really hard
Mhm.
to overcome the paradox of trying to save somebody while being temporarily rather shocking to them, right? So it's like that. And in cold
Mhm.
calling, we're entering that realm where we're the doctor. We know we have something that's good for them, which is a meeting. That's our product, is a meeting.
Mhm.
And we know the meeting will teach them something under all circumstances, whether we do any business with them or not in the future. So we have a really good product. I mean, it's not like, we're not selling 20-year jail sentences like Chris Voss, author of Never Split the Difference, talks about. with negotiating with hostage takers and terrorists, we got a pretty good product, a meeting where somebody can learn something from an expert. Wow, great product. But we got to ambush somebody in
Mhm.
order to make them aware of the opportunity for this meeting. And now we have a paradox. And
Mhm.
when we're faced with paradoxes that have emotional content, we retreat to protect ourselves.
Mhm.
And where do we retreat to? Activity. I think I'll go do some research on Zoom Info. I think I'll go look at them on their website. You're not going to talk to them, but it's like, well, I'm going to do some research, right? So it's nerve wracking. My wife is a very experienced salesperson and sales manager, and she used Connect and Sell for the first time about 6 weeks ago. It took her 3 weeks to prepare for it. I mean, we're talking about somebody who carries multi-billion-dollar quotas rather casually, right? 3 weeks of preparation, lots of research. And afterwards, I asked her, well, what was it like? And she said, well, one, it's a great weight loss program. Gets your heart rate up. You don't have to go to the gym ever again. You just get ready to push that button. And, and she said, the second thing is every bit of research I did was a waste. It turns out all I needed to know is these people are human beings.
Yeah. What a great lesson, but oh, so a few great nuggets there, Chris. And one of them is, you know what you said when they're just, let me do some Zoom info. And a lot of people do that. And I work with a lot of female founders. And sometimes there's a tendency for women to be in motion and we're hiding. And I need to take another course and a certification before you just pull the trigger and bet on yourself. But I love what Scott did, and just that I think the mindset thing is so big. And what I would say is, think about in your personal life when you I don't know, get a new, you get your golf clubs regripped, or you get a new a woman gets this amazing shampoo. You're doing your friends a disservice if you don't tell them about it. If they're golfers and if they have limp hair, you're doing them a disservice. So how can you just say, I wanted to, and just come at it from that same lens? I have something I know because I've worked with so many companies in that before state where they're doing manual. It's taken them 1 to 2 hours to get a call. That is not a good use of their time. And now this is what they're seeing. Like, there should be excitement there going, I can't even wait to tell you how this is going to help you.
Yeah, it's just a funny thing. We know we have something valuable. We don't like that we have to go through something awkward to get the value in front of somebody. And we keep hoping there's another way, a silver bullet. Well, there is another way. Go to conferences and talk to people there. But make sure everybody in your TAM is in your conferences you're going
Hmm.
to.
Hmm.
And now you have another problem. And you're talking about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have a serious problem, which is whatever they're offering in a competitive environment, whether they think so or not. The competition is everywhere, including status quo, indecision, all the big competitors. And then there's other alternatives that look more like you.
Hmm.
And when you hesitate in a competitive environment, your skills are never allowed to come out and compete, or your ability, the value of your offer stays behind. It's as though, say, you were in a competitive environment like a 100-meter dash, and you're faster than everybody else, but you can't get off the blocks. The gun goes off, and you just kind of wait around to see how everybody else
Hmm.
is doing. Oh, I think I'll go get myself, tested to see if I'm really fast enough to run this race. I think I'll get a certification in being a fast runner. It's like, hey, those folks are taking off. They don't have to be as fast as you. They're on the move,
Yeah.
and they're moving in a direction that makes sense. And the direction in business that makes sense is a direction in which we have a guaranteed outcome. And the guaranteed outcome of a cold call that's skillfully executed actually has two. One guaranteed outcome, if you execute it skillfully, is you always get the other person to trust you 100% of the time. That's the goal. The goal of a cold call is not to get a meeting. That's the gravy. The goal of a cold call is to get somebody who's potentially relevant to your future business as you're moving forward to trust you. Because if they trust you now, they might trust you in the future, and they have to trust you more than they trust themselves to buy from you because you're an expert and they're not. Otherwise, you wouldn't be selling in B2B. And so now you're in this really interesting situation where cold calling feels really awkward, but it's guaranteed to produce a positive result that you need in your business, which is trust. And then a second positive result, which is you get information about the market, which is proprietary information you can use
Hmm.
competitively. One of the things I really think is funny about the modern world is folks go out and they use public information to try to compete. Well, you can't win based on what everybody else has. It just doesn't work. You need proprietary
Hmm.
information that gives you an advantage. And that you get from private conversations. And every cold call is a private conversation.
Yep, I love that. I mean, even I always say any engagement is just to leave them better than they were before the call, whether it's in person or Zoom or on the phone. And I think when you can gather information, you take that, it's like that rolling stone gathering moss. You take that into the next call and you're validating what they've shared from the source using their language. And the more calls you have, the sense from your prospect is you really get us. Like you understand us. You must then be able to help us. But I think when the expectation is I gotta close this or it's something really harsh, it's like, no, it's like you said, build trust, but gather information to serve to expand your knowledge and impact more accounts.
Yeah, exactly. The way we look at our own business here at Connect and Sell is everybody else looks at meetings. I like meetings. Meetings are great because you have conversations that are more fulsome than a cold call and you learn a lot. But I'll count conversations first, just regular old conversations, either net new or follow up. My team today, I'm just looking at their numbers here. It's early today. It's 9:36. It's the first day of a post-holiday weekend here in the States. Our Memorial Day was yesterday. And my team of 10 have had 78 conversations with decision makers today. All right, I'm
Mhm.
good. Like, how do you feel? How do you lose from that position? It
Mhm.
takes lots and lots of conversations to learn what's really on somebody's mind. And at the very beginning, all that's on their mind is they want to get off the call with their self image intact. Okay, you already know what they're thinking. So you can use that in a helpful way by having them listen to you as a precondition of getting off the call. And when they listen to you, you can intrigue them with some curiosity. But don't, by the way, going to value is a disaster in a cold call. It's just a
Mm.
disaster. There are people who are so skilled and they teach cold calling that they teach folks just get the value out in front of them right now. It's like, look, you're so skilled that people trust you in milliseconds and you can go to value and get away with it. But the rest of us mortals, we need a
Mhm.
safer path. And the safe
Mhm.
path for us is to go from fear, not our fear, but the prospect's fear of us, because we're an invisible stranger who just entered their life and ambushed them. It's very natural to be afraid of people in the dark, right? In the environment of evolution, an invisible stranger was somebody from across the river who painted their face incorrectly, horizontal instead of our wonderful vertical stripes. And when they're invisible, it's nighttime and they're in our village and they're not bringing us a Bud Light. It's bad. We do not like invisible strangers. We're afraid of them. So when we cold call somebody, we're actually scaring them. They won't admit it, but it's really good for us to know it because it gives us a platform to work from, which is their fear can be relieved in a way that causes them to trust us 100% of the time. And if we can get there, we're done. We've won the game, the cold call game. Now we can go see whether we can score some extra points. And that would be, can we get them curious enough to take a meeting? But if we go to
Mhm.
value, we'll abrogate the trust that we
Mhm.
just got in the first seven
Yeah.
seconds of the call. We'll throw the trust away by saying, "Oh, actually, I was just kidding. I'm really here to pitch you."
Yeah. You work so hard to get hopefully the trust, and then you've eroded it. So talk to us, Chris, about relieving the fear. So they are afraid of being cornered on a call. How do you what are some tactics that some of your top performers are doing that's relieving the fear, that's allowing them to build trust in a very short period of time?
Well, we stumbled onto this years ago. There's a guy named Jordan Dufour who worked in our Denver office back when we had offices, and he outperformed everybody. And we isolated Jordan and somebody else and number two player in separate rooms and just had them have conversations with Connect and Sell. You can have a lot of them. Like, so it was, it's good experimental ground. Had everybody else split randomly on the team, one room or the other. And one person picked up something from Jordan and their stats went up. And what they picked up was two sentences at the beginning of the call. We had no idea why they worked. The two sentences were really awkward and strange. So the first one, is just this hard, heavy, slam yourself to the ground, and it's self-indictment. It's just Jordan would say, and he's like one of the nicest guys you've ever met. He's just this very pleasant individual. But he would start out with this very serious tone of voice and say, Karen, I know I'm an interruption. Exactly like that. He would just throw himself under the bus. And
Mhm.
then he would say, can I have 27 seconds to tell you why I called? And he'd do it with a couple little micro chuckles in there with his voice going up. Everybody stayed on, but that wasn't what was interesting. What was interesting is it affected all of his downstream numbers. And we didn't know why. We were mystified. But it's like, hey, it works. We're scientists, right? Go ahead, do it. And after several years of this, I was just by, I don't know, dumb luck, I went to a holiday party because I was told I could sit at the same table as Chris Voss. And I'm a huge
Oh.
admirer of Chris Voss, the author of Never Split the Difference,
Mhm.
How to Negotiate as if Your Life Depends on It. So I wanted to get some wisdom from him. And so, when dinner was over, I didn't corner him because that would have been bad. He's an FBI guy, and, you don't corner those people. But I asked him, Chris, how long do we have to get trust in a cold call? And he said 7 seconds. I kind of jumped a little. The way he said it was pretty sharp. And I said, wow, our research says 8 seconds. And he says, your research is wrong. It's 7 seconds. I said, okay, well, what do we have to do in those 7 seconds? And he said, oh, that's easy. I'm thinking, I know he has a bourbon in his hand, but I mean, this guy knows his stuff. He can't be that bourbonized. And I said, easy. This doesn't sound easy to me. What do you have to do? And he says, oh, it's easy. All we have to do is show the other party that we see the world through their eyes. We call it tactical empathy. And
Mhm.
then demonstrate to them that we're competent to solve a problem they have right now. So I thought for a second, I said, well, isn't the problem they have right now me? I'm the problem, right? That's right now. I mean, I could pretend they were sitting there thinking about the business problem that we think we solved, but they weren't. They answered the phone for some weird reason. And it wasn't to discuss a business problem that's on my mind. It's like now they have a problem getting off the phone with their self image intact. So he said, bingo, that's why you will always succeed in a cold call because you know their problem and you are their problem. So offer to solve their problem and they'll trust you. And that little dynamic, which really happens in 7 seconds and done skillfully, and it takes lots of practice, by the way, it sounds so easy. 2 sentences, how hard can that be, right? Well,
Mhm.
they're two very, very emotionally awkward sentences for the person saying them. You have to deeply believe that this is worthwhile. You are hitting them in the chest, and then you're going to do a little surgery on them, and it's for their own
Mhm.
good. Oh my goodness. So you're just going to schedule some surgery, actually. So
Mhm.
it's one of those funny things that, it's like we've been doing it for a while out of like scientific validated ignorance. And Chris comes along and says, basically, I trotted out those 2 sentences. I know I'm an interruption. Can I have 27 seconds to tell you why I call? And he goes, perfect. Don't change a word.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when people do change a word, it's not because the words are what's right. It's because they freak out and they bail out. It's just like I do with my golf swing. Under pressure, I bail out before I get to the top of my swing. And that slightly shortened swing will hit the ball left into somebody's house every time.
Mhm.
So why I am not a competitive golfer. There's a bunch of other reasons. I can't putt for squat. But um, it's that under pressure, we under emotional pressure, we bail out on performance precision, no matter what it is we've learned to do. And so it's really important to learn if you want to make trust, if you think building trust is key, and I believe
Mhm.
it's everything, then you need to learn how to manufacture it consistently under pressure, and your voice will give you away. And
Mhm.
that's the problem. Our voices are what bails out. I have a guy on our team who'll say sometimes, he is a great salesperson, but he'll say, I know I'm a bit of an interruption. Now, that
Mm.
doesn't sound too bad, does it? It's horrible because instead of throwing himself under the bus, he's basically saying, I'm going to make an excuse for myself here. This isn't self indictment. This is sort of self justification. I'm just a bit of
Yeah.
an interruption. It's okay. And then people
Mhm.
hang up on him.
Mhm. It's funny the small nuances, what they make, the difference. And what would you say, Chris, for someone on your team who says, you know what, that I understand acknowledging that I'm interruption, but that language of do you have 27 seconds for me to tell you why I call? What if that doesn't that style is not them? What would you say to them for that? Do they have to say that? Can they say something different, or does the science say that those exact words and numbers are what has to be repeated?
It's those words and numbers happen to work. Nobody knows what else might work. There could be 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 things that work.
Hmm.
To me, saying to a rep, why don't you play linguistic psychologist? I'm pretty sure you're one of the best in the world. You probably spent your whole life studying, doing brain imaging on people while they're listening to words and all that kind of stuff. And therefore, you should make up your own language with maximum impact. It's kind of like saying, you look like a pretty good baseball player. I like the way you swing the bat. Why don't you invent the golf swing? No
Yeah.
lessons needed. You just go invent it from scratch because I'm sure it's really similar. It's not. It's a precision game. To me, when somebody says, I like my style, it's like, okay, I like my style too. But the question is, what's actually going to happen? And you
Hmm.
probably don't have the 10 to 15 years of repeated failure that it takes in order to discover from scratch, like Jordan Dufour did, something
Hmm.
that quote unquote works. I mean, think about that subtlety of, I know I'm a bit of an interruption.
Yeah.
Everybody would like to say that. Everybody, that
Yeah.
sounds so much better than I know I'm an interruption. And they'd like to say it in that little voice of like, It's okay, I'm apologizing." That's not an apology. That's a statement of fact that happens to be negative about me as a human being in this moment. I
Hmm.
know I'm a bad thing to you right now. Do we agree? Yes, we do. Okay, let's
Hmm.
move forward, right? And so it's not so much about the words or not the words. It's like what I find is when somebody is saying, I don't even want to try that, I know that won't work for me. What they're really
Hmm.
saying is, I'd like to go back in the weeds.
Yeah, I'm
I'd
afraid.
like to get out of this situation.
Hmm.
It's too exacting for me. There's no fan club on earth for accountability. It's got zero members to this day.
Yeah, and I hear you. But you know what? If you could tie it back, like what's really standing out here to me is that the problem we're solving for that first problem is that it's us. And I think that once you know that, I think once you call out the gorilla in the room and acknowledge that we're the problem, you'll say whatever you want because that's the first commitment you've got. All of a sudden from them, you've created safe space. They've disarmed and they're more willing to hear what you have to say. I think also everyone wants to know, am I getting cornered here? Is this a 3-minute call, a 2-minute? Oh, it's 27 seconds. You've reduced the risk. I can give you that as long as you stick to it.
Yeah, and 27, by the way, is an extremely easy
I
number
mean,
to say that you can actually fit a curiosity
yeah.
statement inside of with no effort at all. It takes generally about 17 to 19 seconds to say something that will get somebody curious. That is that has enough components in it. The three components that are most valuable generally in a curiosity statement are something economic. Usually it's money, but it could be waste or time. It could be risk. Risk is an economic factor. Something emotional. In business, the dominant emotion is
Hmm.
frustration. We're all frustrated. We just don't feel like we have the support or the resources to do our job as well as we hold ourselves accountable for. So that's kind of that's an always issue. So that's my go-to for emotions is frustration. And then there's something strategic, and this is what your business is
Hmm.
about, is helping somebody remove an obstacle to where they're trying to go. So you take a guess as to the obstacle because otherwise you wouldn't have a product. I mean, that'd be kind of silly, right? What do you do? Oh, anything? That doesn't work. You have to actually kind of specialize in order to be able to help folks. So it's like, what do you do? Well, I do, laser therapy on people's eyes with glaucoma. So I believe we've discovered a breakthrough that completely eliminates the frustration and the time that you waste trying to find a treatment for glaucoma that doesn't involve eye drops. Wow, that's kind of cool. We're all lucky and I have glaucoma and I happen to have it, so it's a fun one to bring up. Then, I'm curious. Really, no eye drops, right? So that's a strategic goal of mine, is to reduce any medicines that I take. That's just personal for me. I don't like them. And so it gets me curious. And you're not telling me how you do it. You're not telling me what you have. You're just getting me curious, but you have enough components there that if I'm an economic person, then it resonates economically, my time. If I'm an emotional person, then it resonates emotionally. It's frustrating to have to keep doing something I don't like to do to treat something I'm stuck with, and that I know I came to through negligence. And oh, wait a minute, the strategy involves removing something that I don't like. Fantastic. So that kind of curiosity statement is easy to construct and to put inside of 17 seconds. And that leaves you an extra 10 to ask for the meeting. It only takes 3 seconds to ask for the meeting. And the reason I reached out today is to get 15 minutes on your calendar to share this breakthrough with you. Okay, that's done. Maybe 4 seconds if you're a slow talker. So now you're about 21 seconds and you've kept a promise. And you just can't beat keeping a promise to somebody in your very first interaction with them.
Well, if you had trust, you've you've broken it after that because that's your first commitment gone. But I love those three strategic, so economic, emotional, and strategic. And I think the importance here, Chris, is really knowing having a tight ICP, because if there's no resonance and you're leading with an emotional frustration or whatever that emotion is, but it's not what they're actually feeling, you've missed the mark, right? And then everything downstream, the economic impact and the strategy is gone as well. So talk to us about the importance of having a list. I mean, because to execute your product, we need to be drawing from something. So really knowing your ideal customer profile, like how important is it to really have a list that is accurate of potential prospects that you actually can help?
It's really important, and yet it's a quandary because publicly available information is generally not sufficient to avoid a massive, massive false negative problem. When you're out trying to talk to folks, there are the obvious targets. By the way, they're obvious to your competitors as well. This is what
Hmm.
intent data is about. Let's wait till they're visiting websites that are like mine. That's a
Yeah.
like why would we choose a red ocean strategy to get in a competitive fight on every single deal? And yet that's what intent data lets us do, is go get into the red ocean where the sharks are swimming and the blood is flowing, and see whether we can get a deal. We're probably going to end up discounting or something equally ridiculous at that point. So, how do we make a list that doesn't just get us positives to spend our time well, but avoids false negatives, avoids leaving out the good parts of the market that might have been hard to detect through publicly available data? Publicly available data is sort of never going to be good enough to tell us who not to talk to. It's really just hard. It's hard to say. So our list is always a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis. In fact, each person is a hypothesis that they may resonate with my message and take a meeting. And that's actually what the hypothesis is about. It's not about whether they need our solution. Because after all, my product is the meeting. And so the
Hmm.
question is, will the message resonate with this person sufficient that they will believe it's worth 15 minutes of their time to learn about a breakthrough? That's a fairly straightforward bar to understand, but it's still a hypothesis. It needs to be tested like all good hypotheses. And the way we test it is through that breakthrough statement. That that little three-part breakthrough statement is, I call it ringing the bells. It's like somebody is asking you, tell me, are these bells made out of, unfinished clay, or are they made out of brass and they ring? Well, I don't know. They
Hmm.
all look the same. They're painted the same. Everything's the same. I got to hit them with a hammer and see if they go thud or bong. And if they go bong, then I go, aha, that kind of bell. Well, my hammer is my conversation. And a skilled conversation seeks resonance, which is what's going on inside of a bell when it rings, rather than thud. It's okay to have a lot of thud conversations as long as they're efficient enough. So now we come down to this raw processing question, which is, well, what's the constrained resource? Your time. Okay.
Hmm.
So how many conversations can you have per unit time? If you can have 5 times as many, your list only has to be 1/5 as good in terms of the hypothesis fitting the theory, so to speak, everything being perfect. So, in one way, better to spend your time just talking to people and honing your hypothesis through feedback and making your list better and better and better. What we tend to see is, and this is an emotional issue, it's emotionally extremely comfortable to sit around making lists. It's great because the list never challenges you. You can say, oh, I'm having a hard time finding this. Oh, I need this data and so forth. But when you come right down to it, you're kind of avoiding the big question, which is, yeah, but is it going to resonate? But then there's another bigger question mathematically, which is which of the people on this list, at least if you're cold calling, answer the phone? Right? There's a bimodal distribution of phone answering behavior. There are people who answer the phone a lot. There are people who answer the phone almost never. And there's a big desert in between. So that 22
Hmm.
to 1 consists of about a third of the people at 7 to 1 and about two-thirds of the people at 28 to 1. So that's actually why it's there's not really any 22 to 1 out there. There's like these two populations. But in advance, do you know who's in which one? Now we do, by the way, at Connect and Sell, we know in general who's in which population because we do 53 million phone calls a year. So we know who answers the phone. And we actually embed that in our system. We call it fast phone numbers. So when you use Connect and Sell, it says, well, let's call the people who answer first because your time is precious. So let's spend your time, oh, dear user and salesperson, talking to people instead of waiting to talk to people. That may seem obvious, but it actually, here's a theory of market segmentation that you won't see proposed very often, but I think it's the fundamental theory of market dominance. It says, talk to people who answer the phone and find out if these people actually resonate with what it is that you have to say. And if they
Hmm.
do, well, all to the good. And if they don't, well, take them off your list and learn from that, tune your ICP. But your first segment has to do with time. You're in a competitive situation. You only have so much time. By the way, your big competitor is your overhead. Your overhead is like a racehorse. If it's sitting out there at night while you're sleeping, it's eating, right? Your overhead is your number one competitor. Your main
Hmm.
reason for losing deals is no decision. This is the real world that all of us who build businesses live in, right? So every day that goes by in which you're not talking to people and learning about your hypothesis is a day that you have less runway ahead of you. So research sounds good, but at the margin, will it yield an answer to this question, which is who can you get a conversation with?
I mean, can I say amen? How do I finish that? But it's so true. Like, we have to validate our hypothesis, and the only way to do that is to have a conversation. And so often I see marketing departments sitting internally and hearing each other, their sounding board for each other. And I'm like, have you tested this with the customer? Like, you guys love hearing each other talk and everyone's high-fiving, and I'm like, but have you thrown it out there to see if it actually is in fact the problem that they're solving? Is it worth solving now? And is this a possible solution? So I just think everyone loves to hear themselves talk and look inward, but it's like the only way is to have conversations externally to see if it's true or not.
Yeah, it's funny. Everybody talks about sales and marketing alignment. Sales and marketing alignment actually occurs in one place. 100% of the time, it occurs inside of a cold call. Sales and marketing are perfectly
Hmm.
aligned inside of a cold call. And the reason is this: marketing comes up with a hypothesis. Even if you're a salesperson making a list, that's a marketing act to put somebody on that list because you're
Hmm.
claiming that they're potentially in your ICP, which is a marketing concept. So, okay, you're playing your marketing role, or maybe marketing's doing it, and they're on your list. So now we're going to go and we're going to actually interact with the market. We're going to do a survey. It's called a cold call. The survey is, does our message resonate with this person on this list? So that's marketing feedback that occurs. Interestingly enough, there's also marketing effect, which is they'll visit your website when you talk to them. The most ignored facet of the cold call is the fact that it is the strongest statistical driver of folks to go to your website. Because when you say who you are and what company you're with, well, they're looking for more reasons to get off this call. So they go to your website so they can say, Fantastic, Karen. You know what? We're all set. They're motivated to go to your website.
Mhm.
And in fact, the negative conversations that come out of cold calls will drive more business than the positive conversations that yield meetings because there's this other channel, which your marketing department set up and probably did a pretty good job with. And when somebody goes to the website, they're kind of stuck now. You just got the effect of a very expensive ad, which is an ad that gets somebody in your target, as far as you can tell, your target to actually visit your website. If you could manufacture that, if you went to a
Mhm.
marketing department and said, "Look, I've got a great product for you. Here's what happens." Somebody over there, you don't have to meet them or talk to them. They're probably people you won't like. They push a button and magically somebody on your target list goes to your website. How much would you pay for that? They
Mhm.
go, "Oh, I pay a lot of money for that. That's like a big deal." Right? Because we can tell they pay a lot of money for it because the folks over at Google only need to have one business, which is selling advertising, and they're one of the biggest companies in the world. So we know that marketing folks love it if somebody could get folks to visit the website. Well, it turns out the most efficient way to get folks in your target market to visit your website is to hold conversations with them. But you can't agree to hold conversations with them without ambushing them. And so sadly, now you're in the
Mhm.
marketing department's zone of discomfort, which happens to reside in the sales department. Therefore, sales and marketing converge inside the cold call.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. And hopefully, even if it's a negative conversation, that feedback loop is exercised. So whatever that initial hypothesis was, it goes back and says, okay, for this persona, for this industry, it's more this, not that, so that they're continually sharpening their axe. That next time they go out marketing is like, you know what, guys, we've got this. It's not what we thought it was, but it's through the conversations we're having, so it's continually updated.
Exactly. And unfortunately, I mean, there's a hard part about all this, which is, well, who actually measures the impact of conversations that don't yield meetings on pipeline? It's not measured
Hmm.
anywhere that I know of. So we got kind of perturbed about that about 5 years ago. I got all agitated about it and decided I was going to figure out how can we measure the influence of conversations on pipeline. And it turns out it was more straightforward than I thought. I was kind of dumb in the way I went about it. I'll give you an example. So here's a company that will remain unnamed. And between January 1st of 2020 and literally yesterday, they've had conversations with folks. They had 100,620 conversations. And those conversations yielded 7,053 meetings. Now, that's just an immense amount of work, right? To have 100,000 conversations. Those 700 or 7,000 meetings generated $31 million of pipeline. Most of it ended up being downgraded because you can't get your ICP right. You can never get the timing right. You're lucky in 1 out of 12 shot to get the timing right. But they closed $1.6 million dollars out of that. Well, here's what's interesting. If you just look at the conversations, not the ones that set meetings, just any of them, there's $271 million dollars of pipeline. So what's 270 over
Hmm.
30 or 227 over 3? Right? It's a number kind of like 9. So nine
Hmm.
times, that is for every dollar of pipeline they got by having conversations that set meetings, they got eight more dollars of pipeline from just the fact that somebody held that conversation. And
Hmm.
that's your whole marketing department right there. That's what that is.
But how powerful is that? I mean, that's like you said, the timing is never in our timeline, but you have access to the pipeline now that it might be 6, 12, 18 months down the road, but you have a pipeline in place.
Yeah, it's
And
so remarkable to me. I missed this. I've been doing this company here for 12 years. I missed this for the first 10.
but how many other customers, like it's not a loss, it's a learning, and it's just not right, and an NRN not right now. But are they capturing that? Are they nurturing that, or are they keeping it warm, or are they just like only focusing on the ones that have closed? I still think there's a huge opportunity there, um, to really refocus on those.
Oh yeah. I mean, you look at the big math problem in sales is twofold. One is to win, you've got to get trust first, which means you
Hmm.
need to go where there's speed, which is the awkward place called the phone. And then the second one is only 1/12 of your market is in market right now for your product. If you
Hmm.
consider the replacement cycle for B2B products is roughly 3 years, and you can never sell something somebody doesn't already solve. I mean, saying you don't bother to solve this problem, but come buy something from me because I think you should solve this problem. That one doesn't happen, right?
Hmm.
It's like you can't sell shampoo for limp hair to me. I'm happy with my limp hair as long as I keep it short enough not to be in my eyes when I'm like bending over a pot, which I'm gonna miss anyway. So I'm good. That shampoo thing ain't gonna work for me, right? I'm never in market for that. But am I in market for a new putter? Well, in B2B, a new putter is like a system that might promise something great. It's solving a problem I already have. I miss a lot of putts. I tend to miss them short and right. So you come up with a putter that says you're going to miss them long and left, and some will go in. Ooh, I'm going to be interested. But I just bought this putter last week. So I'm not in market for a new putter right now. It's the same
Hmm.
thing in business, but worse. Because in business, these considered purchases tend to happen once every 3 years for each category of problem, and therefore each category of solution, including yours. Therefore, you are a 1 in 12 chance of being in the quarter where somebody's making a decision. So you've got to kind of talk to them over and over on average for 6 quarters. That's
Hmm.
just life. I mean, what are you going to do? Leave them? The alternative to me is that you work for your competitor. That is, you go educate and let your competitor transact.
Hmm.
That's that's not a good idea, though, business wise. Spending your money for your competitor is a bad idea.
No, and there's an element there, Chris, to just you got to be hungry for it. Like you got to want it to get over, just get out of your head and be like, yes, I can acknowledge this sucks in the moment. It's going to get easier over time. But like I'm in sales for a reason. Like at the end of the day, we want to make money. And if you're kind of hiding and like you can only do that for so long before you have to go like, look, like get comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Sales has got a it has a serious problem for most of us. In fact, it has two of them. One is we've mostly grown up being taught, unlike you, by the way, and you had a great teacher in your father, right?
Hmm.
My my father didn't think much of salespeople, and I never had a positive view of sales when I was growing up. My mother, oh my God, she would slam doors in people's faces. She did not have a self-image problem that had to be solved. Her
Yeah.
self-image was, I'm going to slam a door in your face. But she would say no, thank you before she slammed the
Yeah.
door in your face, which I always thought was very funny. It's like, oh, she does a little thing for her self-image right there, right? So I grew up in a household where my dad was in procurement and sales was, vendors were okay. You worked with them, but sales itself is like tricking somebody.
Hmm.
And I don't think I ever would have learned the alternative, except I was in an economic situation where I needed a job the next day to pay some medical bills that had showed up the day before with my wife. This is a long time ago, my first wife. And I got a job selling door to door. And
Hmm.
what I realized is when faced with a problem, I already knew this about myself. I tend to break problems down. I'm
Yeah.
really like, I'm obnoxious that way, right? You can tell me X works, Y works, and I'm going to go, well, what about X sub one,
Yeah.
X sub two, X sub three? What about all little pieces? How do they go together? So I broke this problem of door to door selling down, and I had a 97% door to close ratio for my product, which was the opportunity to come back and share the research that I was going to do for them about what they might buy. That turned out to be a great product. It was a meeting. I stumbled onto this, but mostly I was avoiding what seemed like my mom slamming the door in my face, right? I knew that could happen. And
Hmm.
so I broke it down. Sales is tough for everybody because they have to somehow get past that emotional barrier that says, I have to be a problem in order to solve a problem. And it's just hard. I mean, I don't want to be a problem. Were any of us raised like this? Hey, Karen, when you were a little girl, Karen, you've been too good. Why don't you be a problem today?
I think I was the opposite of that. It was when can you be a good girl?
Exactly. So you see, that's why sales came relatively easily to you. You were
Yeah.
used to being the problem.
But you know what? I'll tell you, I got into sales, I think I was around 24 years old, and the first big lesson for me was not to take it personally. And so I remember hearing no and no, but I never thought like no Karen. It was no, the timing was wrong, the product was not a good fit, whatever it was. And then when you go on your own and you're selling a service, it's different, but I still think I don't know. That was my first lesson and it's never left me is I develop a thick shell because I don't take it personally. I don't. There's so many times that someone tries to sell me something. I'm like, it's actually not a good fit or not right now. But I don't feel like I'm attacking them as a person. It's just maybe we'll revisit in 6 months, and it's legit. But I'm like, no. So I think the quicker people can kind of get over themselves, and if they have access to connect and sell like they can because they've got these dialers for them, that they have all these at bats and you have all these chances, but the, we have to remove our self-worth from it. It's they're independent of each other.
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I think it's really hard for folks to do. It's really fun once you do it. I think
Yeah.
becoming a a thoughtful, compassionate salesperson is
Yep.
actually a great advance for most of us in terms of our emotional development and our evolution as a person. And I don't think
Mhm.
folks talk about that a lot. It's like get over this in sales so you can sell is one thing, but it's kind of like the other benefit of learning to cold call. So everybody says millennials and Gen Zs, and I don't know. I don't even know why we name generations. What? How do you tell the difference between one year and another? Oh, you're now a millennial. You're in this year. What does that even mean? People just make this stuff up to sell stuff. But what the heck? I like them selling things. But everybody says like, oh, they don't want to talk on the phone. Well, I tell you what, if you tell somebody who's 27 years old or 22 years old or whatever, this job, cold calling and talking to tons of people, very senior people every day, this is finishing school for future CEOs. This is where you learn the one skill everybody who creates businesses and runs businesses has, which is the
Mhm.
ability to hold a competent conversation with a stranger in a way
Mhm.
that can yield a result. Everybody has to learn this, and this is the
Yep.
easy way to do it because it's going to be like playing a video game. You know how many times you had to fail at whatever your
Mhm.
favorite game was, right? How long does it take to learn those moves in a fighting game or to learn what not to say in an MMO? I mean, it's just like, come on. So, this is an
Mhm.
opportunity to do that. And it turns out, by the way, for some people, it sounds horrible, but it turns out to be kind of fun to have that breakthrough and to make that step to what is really a very adult place to be, which is the ability to hold confidently a conversation with a stranger.
Mhm.
So here's where you get to learn it.
But when you reframe it like that, it's totally different. It's like I have something that you need that's going to help you to get where you want to be. And the quicker you get over yourself, and it's not about us as well. But think about jobs like I bartended all through school and places, even hairdressers or things that professions that you have to make cold call, you have to build trust, you have to do these difficult things quickly, and there's so much of this around us, not just B2B selling. Like we have to just strike up conversations, get their attention in almost everything we do. And so I think we almost it's almost really laser focus on us, and it's even heavier in sales, but it's like this is this is life. Like this is life,
Yeah, this
you
is
know?
where in this profession, even if one were only to do it for a little while and just do this part of it, cold calls and follow up calls, it'll change your life. I actually, when I wrote the article, my first
Mhm.
article about the little script, I entitled it Five Sentences That Will Change Your Life. And I didn't mean as a salesperson. I meant if you can learn to take somebody on this emotional journey from fear to trust and from trust to curiosity, from curiosity to commitment, it'll change your life because that is the natural path
Mhm.
that needs to be trod when you engage with strangers. They will always have a little fear of you. Fear of
Mhm.
strangers is like, we don't have to teach people to do that. It's really natural. And you see it all over the world, right? So,
Yeah.
fear is the natural starting state of a stranger. If we can learn to turn fear into trust by getting over ourselves, by really being kind of a brain surgeon on the other person for their own good. And then if we can go down a safe path with them from trust to curiosity and not be shoving value down their throat. And then from that, we might get commitment to do something
Mhm.
in the future, like meet or not. It doesn't make any difference at that point because we can go repeat this with somebody else.
No, I love it. I love it. And it's just you can feel at the beginning of this conversation to now how it's almost come down. We've reframed it, and it's all how we look at it, and how we see the role we play in it will make the difference between a successful outcome and not. And to be honest, I don't think there is an unsuccessful outcome because you've still gathered information. So there really is no downside because you've had access to somebody, you've got information that may not help you today, but it might help you down the line.
Exactly.
If people are wanting to learn more about Connect and Sell, want to get in touch with you, want to get a demo, what's the best way for them to connect with you, Chris?
Sure. Well, sadly, we won't give them a demo because we're not very nice people. But we will, if they are interested, help them engage in what we call an intensive test drive, which is to actually use our product for a full day of production. And folks have made nothing out of that other than having a lot of conversations, but sometimes they'll make millions of dollars, and that's kind of fun too. So they can get a hold of me at my email address, chris.beall at connectandsell.com. Probably, if it's less me and more about the product, they can go fill out one of those, silly forms on our website, and one of our great salespeople will talk to them, and that'll be a good thing. Um, but all they're going to do is say, "Hey, you want to have a meeting to see whether it might be interesting to take a test drive?" And what we've learned, by the way, is our product doesn't demo very well because the action is inside the user and between the
Hmm.
user and the outside world. And so you got to get under pressure and use it for real. And then I have a podcast called Market Dominance Guys. And so if somebody wants to get inside my head, there's 178 episodes of this stuff. So, if you tolerated this episode today with Karen, you you could, who knows? I actually had somebody print the entire thing off and come and meet me in Seattle in order to tell me that he was running his company based on a book that he'd written by transcribing episodes of Market Dominance Guys. So that means either he's really weird, which is true, or it has some hidden value in there somewhere.
I'm sure it's got time. Well, look at the value you've dropped today. People are going to be changing their mindset approach and calling Connect and Sell to drive the needle forward, undoubtedly. So thank you so much, Chris. Really appreciate everything you've shared. It's opened my eyes as well. Maybe I need to get a test drive behind there and hit the action button and see see if I exhibit tachycardic rhythmia or not.
Oh, you will.
I'm sure I will. Is there a parachute button I can pull?
There is. There's a button that says pause.
That's funny. Well, listen, thank you again. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next time.